Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College, and I'm here tonight with Chris. Oh, sorry, Chris. I always pronounce your name incorrectly.
All right.
Chris
No,
from Juno. And we're talking about how to negotiate your financial aid award. We're going to give you as much knowledge as we know about negotiating, and also just about what's happening with financial aid information being passed from the government to colleges, and what we can expect in terms of the timeline of colleges sharing actual final financial aid awards. And let me just give you a little bit of housekeeping. This is a meeting, so you've all come in with your video and audio muted, but hopefully it's always nice. I appreciate some people who have their video on. It's nice to see people out there instead of talking to the black abyss. And please share any questions or comments in chat. In fact, I'd love if anybody can put in now, if you actually have gotten any information from the college in terms of an award. If maybe some people have gotten merit information early. Some people, have gotten a preliminary financial aid information. So if you've gotten anything, let us know. Just kind of curious to hear what's happening out there with the colleges and the information that they're sending. This is recorded. We'll send the recording tomorrow. And let's get started. Put questions in the chat. I will look at them, and either I might be able to answer them directly, or I'll interrupt Chris, or we'll get to them at the end. And Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you, and love for you to introduce yourself, and then we can get started.
thank you very much, Debbie. So I'm Chris Apkarians, and I started a company called Juno that does a lot of work in the financial aid space for college students, parents, and a lot of graduate students in the US. And what we're going to talk about today is one of my favorite topics, which is how to appeal your financial aid award letter. There's a lot that's changed over the last year that's going to impact the way you receive, appeal, and hear back about what these aid amounts are going to be. And so we're going to start off with talking about how the appeal process works, digging into a little bit more of the timeline and some dates that you should really keep in mind. We'll talk about the documents that you should prepare, and then we're going to go into a lot more detail on a bunch of the different reasons why you'd be able to submit an appeal and some of the documents you might want to collect now, so that once you get back that aid award letter, you're ready to submit something before other people do, assuming that a lot of schools might look at what appeals they get in order of the date that they're received. So just think about this as a session to get prepared, so that really, once you have the ability to appeal, you get first in line and maximize the chances that you'll be able to pay less for your kids to go to college. As we go through, please feel free to ask any questions that you want. There's in the chat box. I see one question here on how long this presentation will be. I'd say it's going to depend heavily on the questions that we get and walk through. I would expect it to be about 45 minutes overall, but depending on the questions, we might go a little bit over. And in case you need to drop off, as Debbie mentioned, everybody will get a copy of both the presentation and a recording of the webinar. So if there's questions that might have been asked that you didn't have a chance to hear, you'll have the opportunity to go back and watch that. And on top of that, I'll give you some contact information after. We have a whole team that is ready to answer any questions that people might have about this process, some additional materials we have that might help you think through next steps. And just think of both of us here as resources to help you figure out how to lower the out-of-pocket cost to pay for college. So there's a couple of questions I see here, just FYI, that I'll wait till we get to a relevant slide to answer, but we will definitely get to. To start off with, if you filed FAFSA over the last year, and I mean for the last academic year or before, you should know that a lot of things have actually changed about that process. You might have already filed it again, But what matters is last year, Congress implemented changes to how the FAFSA process works, the questions that are listed, and it was supposed to make things simpler. Now, in theory, it is simpler, it's shorter, it's faster to complete, but the rollout of the data that schools get from FAFSA has not been great so far. And so there's delays in the process we're going to walk through. And it's really important to recognize that some of the things that you're going to see in whatever financial aid award letter you get back this year are going to look different than what you might have seen in prior years. So if you have filled it out in the past and gotten an aid award letter, just know that things are going to look different. They're going to be different. And it's going to be even more important now to appeal than in the past. One great example before I move on is before this year, if you had multiple children in college at the same time, the FAFSA form let you input that as a field, and it, in most cases, lowered the expected family contribution, which influenced the amount that you'd have to pay. So if you had more kids, the school could take it into consideration and they could reduce the amount you'd have to pay for each person. This year, by default, that is not taken into consideration, but it's one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later on that you can take advantage of in the appeals process to explain to the school and help get you a lower out-of-pocket cost. We'll start with just a general overview of how the appeals process works. So once you get your award letter, we'll talk about the timeline in the next slide. Each school should have a section of their website that explains what their appeal process is. Every financial aid office will do this slightly differently, but in general, there will be a box or someplace or an email address where you can send a formal appeal package. In that process, you will need to provide some level of documentation and citing specific reasons why you think you should be eligible for or you should be getting more financial aid than you are. The school is actually required now to review every single case. And one important thing to know is the financial aid officers who look at these appeals have, by law, the ability to change certain things about the inputs they use to calculate how much aid you can receive. This doesn't apply for every circumstance, but there's this thing called professional judgment in the financial aid world, which is actually a legal structure, and it means that they actually have some ability to tweak things and help you in situations where, let's say, the appeal really matters and it's valid. They're going to give you a decision. We have no idea how long it's going to take after you appeal for them to give you a decision. Historically, that process, and a bunch of people I've spoken to, has taken somewhere around 2 to 3 weeks. This year, it could be wildly different, and I'll get into why in the next slide. And after you get an appeal back, really important to note, you actually have the opportunity to continue asking for more aid. So don't view it as a final absolute decision. There's going to be, and there will be, some process by which, if you're unhappy with the results you've gotten, it might pay off to be a little bit persistent and continue asking for them. Now, here's the overall timeline. And let me walk through some of the basics. From December of this past year and on, people have been able to apply for, generally everybody's been able to apply for FAFSA, which is, in case anybody doesn't know, the federal form that all families have to fill out in order to qualify for financial aid for the next academic year. Traditionally, when you file that form, schools get the data within a few weeks. This year, because of changes that have happened in the process and things that have broken down, schools didn't receive that data from the FAFSA form yet. As of right now, the best estimate the Department of Education has put out is that schools will start getting this data in mid-March. We don't know if that's going to hold true or not, but that would mean that no matter when if you filed it in December, school probably doesn't even know what your financial situation is until at least next week, perhaps longer. And then we would expect them to take a few weeks to review all of that data and create the financial aid award letters that they send to you. So what you should know is, and this is probably the main takeaway from this part, if you've already filled out FAFSA, you will likely start receiving financial aid award letters for need-based aid anytime between the middle of March and the beginning of April. It could get pushed further, but that is the current target. Once you get that award letter, the most important thing to do is be ready to appeal before other people do. We'll walk through all the reasons why you can and what you should prepare in advance. But it's important to be prepared now so that you can get it, and a few hours later or the next day, you'll be in a position to submit the right format of what you need in order to ask for aid. Traditionally, you want to know exactly what school is going to cost before you commit to which one you're going to go to. Most schools' deadlines for committing to them is usually in early May. That is also getting pushed back for many programs this year. So really the key thing to know is appeal as quickly as you can so you can get responses from the schools that you or your children have been admitted to so that you can make a good decision about where they're going to go to school before the deadline sets. Debbie, if I could ask for a favor, just because it's a little hard to track and I see a bunch of comments, do you mind just chiming in if there is anything that you think we should be answering as we go along here?
Sure. I've actually been responding in there, but I will bring up some important ones. Actually, I mean, one of the most important ones people have been asking is, can they appeal merit? Yes,
Absolutely.
you can. And we're going to talk about it. So
yeah, that'll be the first thing we discuss when we get to reasons. And we'll definitely go through that. Some of the documents we're going to go through in detail later on, specific reasons why you can appeal, and the likely documents you want to collect to be able to support that reason. Overall, you're going to need potentially 3 things, and we're going to go through these in more detail. So a formal appeal letter is going to be a part of every process. I'm going to give you some templates that you can use specifically for merit-based appeals. Depending on the reasons that you're citing for an appeal, there might be certain types of supporting documentation that you want to get ready to collect now. There's a lot of things that change between the time that people file FAFSA and the time they go to school that we'll walk through what those things are and the types of data you want to collect. So one message I want to drive home is that when you get your financial aid award letter, you should really think of it as a first draft and not a final draft. Schools are expecting a very large share of people to appeal their financial aid award letter. They're not going to rescind an admission or take any negative action just because you're asking for a little bit more help to pay for a school, whether it's for merit-based aid or need-based aid. Once you're admitted, you should feel very comfortable and safe about that scenario. And it's incumbent upon you to get a little bit uncomfortable with how aggressively you're asking for and arguing for more financially. And there's different scenarios we're going to go through in a minute, but I just want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with knowing that this is not really something that happens on a one-off basis. A lot of people are going to do this. You might as well do it too, because there's no cost, no downside, and the best thing that can happen is you lower the amount you're going to pay. In fact, schools are actually now required to allow you to appeal your financial aid. One of the changes that's happened to the Department of Education is that by default, schools now have to let you know that you're allowed to appeal. They have to have a portion of their website where you can submit an appeal. They have to consider every single appeal on a case-by-case basis that is filed. So if you send something, you will get a response. They are not allowed to ignore it. In that process, they also will have to collect certain forms of documentation, but they're not allowed to charge you some additional application fee or review fee or do anything like that in order to process or look at an appeal. And everything that about their process does have to be publicly disclosed. So that's one of the main benefits of this FAFSA Simplification Act is everybody can, should, and will appeal, and the school has to go through each and every one. And just one simple principle to remember here is that financial aid budgets at a lot of schools are limited. In many cases, they're going to look at appeals on a case-by-case basis in the order that they're received. And if you're not the one who is asking for more aid, and somebody else is likely going to ask before you do, if there's extra money, they're going to get it and you're not. So speed is of the essence, planning now is of the essence, and just being comfortable with asking is key to making this work. There's 3 overall buckets of appeals that you can make. The first one we're going to walk through is merit-based appeals. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why you might want to cite in order to be able to conduct that appeal. We'll walk through an example of a lot of incredible data that Debbie and her team have been collecting on merit-based appeal amounts. And we'll provide you with a template that you can use to submit to the school. You can edit it however you like, but I think it's a good baseline to start with when you want to submit that appeal. The second bucket of appeals that we'll go through in a little bit more detail is something I'm calling change of circumstance. So any data that has, when you submitted FAFSA, it was based on tax year 2022, and it only collects certain points of data. If anything has changed since then in your family's financial situation or family structure, or anything additional that was not captured by FAFSA in the first place in terms of certain types of expenses, this is a great opportunity to ask for more aid. A lot of people don't know that they can do this. We'll walk through and give you a cheat sheet on a lot of the valid reasons why you're able to. And then we'll very quickly cover some unusual circumstances that the Department of Education cites as reasons why students specifically can ask for more financial aid. Debbie, maybe you want to walk through a little bit of the tool that you and your team.
Sure. So hopefully maybe you guys have seen, because we've been sending out emails about this site and putting it on social media, but we created a site called compareoffers.roadtocollege.com. And actually it's been around for at least about 5 years and right now. And what it gives you the ability to do 2 things. One is you can just put in your offers for yourself, and it just gives you an easy way to make a quick comparison of what the net cost of all your offers are. I mean, this is something you could do on an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet, but it just gives you a place to put all that information. But and the second thing, which is the more powerful, is that for every offer that you put into that particular school, you can then go see offers from other students who have also shared it within the tool. Everything is shared anonymously. Actually, this is an example of, I just took a quick screenshot of Northeastern that shows, what other people have shared. And this is really helpful, particularly for the Merit Scholarships Award. You can then kind of see, well, is what the school offered you kind of in line to what other students got? And the things that you want to look at, and we have this grouped, is you do want to look at within your SAI range, those particular students, because you'll start to see a little bit of a pattern that colleges are offering different merit, based on a combination of a student's academic record, sometimes their state, because they want to attract students from different states, and definitely, their social economic level. And the best way for us to share that with you guys is really by SAI level, because that gives you a sense of, what somebody's capacity is to pay. So I encourage you, both for the community, to share your information here, and then for yourselves, because then you can see if your student is being offered, a similar amount to a similar type of student who got money from the school. We also ask about students' test scores. So, and if somebody doesn't have a test score listed, it meant that they applied to that school test optional. So, a lot of good information. Honestly, we helped families in the past write some of these letters, particularly for merit. And this is what we go to ourselves, and to see, how does that student stack up to other students? You can definitely see, and I remember there was a case last year that a student got a little bit less than somebody else who had a similar, academic profile. And, we cited it. What I wouldn't do necessarily is, kind of say, I'm looking at data from compare offers, and that's the reason why we think that my students should get more money. I don't think that's going to be valid enough, but it gives you the confidence, to kind of know that you should appeal, because you might not have gotten the most that your student can. And it also gives you the sense of maybe what you should appeal on. So for example, the student that I mentioned last year, we could tell that they were very close to, academically from their test scores to what another student got at a higher amount. So we kind of emphasized that. And I think in that case, the student actually might have even taken the test again, which, and the school didn't have the most recent test score. So, hopefully this is helpful to you. This is, completely free. Information is shared anonymously. Hopefully, it can give you a sense that you should appeal. I mean, I kind of even agree with Chris. I would appeal regardless, even if maybe what you've gotten is in line with everybody else, because there is no downside. But this will kind of give you even more confidence or more evidence that your student might have the ability to get more money from the particular college. I do want to answer a question that's coming up, Chris, a lot. I don't know if you've seen it. And about if a family, I saw some questions asking the family saying that they submitted FAFSA. Obviously nobody's gotten anything back. They've gotten merit, and should they appeal now because they've gotten a merit offer, but they don't have anything from FAFSA? My opinion is, if you might have submitted FAFSA, and if you truly believe that you're not going to get needs-based aid, which honestly you would probably and should have a sense of whether or not you're in that bucket, and maybe you submitted FAFSA because A, the school required it, or B, you want to potentially take out loans. But if you're pretty confident you're not going to get needs-based aid, I don't see any harm. I would actually start appealing for merit if that's all that you're going to get.
I agree. And it's a great segue to our section on how to appeal for merit. So when it comes to merit-based appeals, what's most effective is if you've been admitted to more than one place. You don't have to have been admitted to more than one place that gave merit-based aid. It is fundamentally all a negotiation. But let's assume that you or your student were admitted to multiple programs that gave different levels of merit aid, and there was one school that he or she really wanted to attend that was giving less aid than another, or let's say the amount of merit-based aid being provided still made the net cost a little bit uncomfortable to take on. In that scenario, I think it's really valuable to reach out to the school that you want to go to most, start there, and explain something along the lines of, dear financial aid committee, I am incredibly excited about the opportunity to attend this program, but I need a little bit more financial help to make this work. I've gotten more aid offers from some competing institutions, but this is my first choice. I really see myself succeeding here and contributing to the community. If there's anything that can be done to help increase the amount of merit-based aid I'm eligible for, I'd love to discuss it. And keep it short and sweet. Let them know it's your first choice. Let them know some other places giving you more money. You don't have to explicitly ask for how much more you want. You can if you want to.
Yeah, I can't really, I think you have to do what you feel comfortable. I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it where we haven't actually specified a dollar amount and, they are offered a good amount. And I've seen it where we've been really specific and we kind of like, say why they need this extra money, and that has worked. So it's worked both ways.
Yeah. Traditionally, when I've advised people to do this, I've told them initially not to put a dollar amount and see if the school might come back with something bigger than we would have asked for. Candidly, right now, because schools are so pressed for time in this appeals process and they might not have the ability to do multiple rounds of negotiation in the way that they would have in the past, it might make sense to be a little bit more upfront right now with the amount that you'd want. Again, I don't know what's going to work the best, but a very simple template along the lines of something that we have here. I know the font is a little bit small, so you don't have to read the whole thing. But this is a template I've seen many people use quite successfully. And I'm sure Debbie and Roger College have a few other versions of theirs as well. When we send this deck out, there's a link here you can click to just copy this from a Google Sheet and just download that document and edit anything that you'd want. You can just use it as a starting point for something that we've seen people use successfully in the past. But to the point that was being raised earlier, absolutely, you can appeal merit-based aid now. You can appeal it now, and if you end up getting more need-based aid from the same schools later, that could just be a cherry on top. It's possible that they would just give you more merit-based aid now and give you more need-based aid on top of that. So frankly, go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, I mean, think of it like this. Merit aid is a little bit more subjective, because it's really like how much the school really wants your student to, accept and enroll. Need-based aid is a little bit more technical. It's based on the FAFSA. That's based on a little more regulations. There is actually an override that financial aid officers can do called professional judgment, where they can kind of like, basically say, we're going to just override all of the formulas, and and we believe that the student should get this. But I think it's good to make that distinction, because if you're appealing for merit, then like show as much reason why you believe your student should get it, whether it's academically, whether because it's truly their first choice, whether because you believe that they're going to bring something to the college that would make it valuable for them. So, I personally think you kind of appeal slightly differently, when you write the letter. And then need-based aid, again, is like more technical. It's because something, and Chris will go through it more specifically, because something truly changed, your financial situation is different from 2022. There was information about your finances that were, would never really asked, or you didn't have a chance to include it on the FAFSA. So, and you have to really document that.
There's a lot of great questions here about who should submit the appeal, the parent or the child. It's a great question because I've seen it done both ways, but more successfully from the perspective of the student. I also have seen it done successfully where the student initially sends the message about, I really think I'm going to excel here. It's where I want to see myself, but this is like a difficult total cost for my family to take on, and for the parent to write an adjoining letter that just explains the same thing to some degree. I would not necessarily recommend that the parent only sends it in this scenario, but Debbie, let me know if you would disagree with that.
I mean, I think if it's purely financial, there's something, again, in the financial situation that you need to explain, or has changed. And, it depends whether or not you want your student to know all of that information. I think that the colleges see more often that just the parent responds if it's purely financial. But if you're comfortable, I think it is better if the student responds, or it comes from the student, whether it's financial or merit. Definitely, if it's merit, I think it should come from the student.
Yeah, sorry.
Of course,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that you're not helping, write it, and absolutely, you should be doing it with them, but it does come across much better from merit standpoint if it's coming from the student.
agreed. Yeah, and I should have clarified that. I meant merit from the student, and then the more need-based stuff and the changes in the FAFSA can absolutely make a lot more sense to come just from the parent. And look, if anybody has, if you want somebody to take a look at a potential appeal letter, if you just want somebody to just glance it over and provide any comments, our support team does this all day long for a bunch of people. More than happy to. The second bucket, sorry,
I'm sorry. Somebody has asked, how do you know when your SAI is too high for need-based aid? I'll just quickly, well, the quickest way is if your SAI is above the cost of attendance, that's clearly you're not getting any need-based aid. If your SAI is below the cost of attendance, I'm hoping that you have run the net price calculator, or you have looked at some statistics that say what % of students with need are offered aid and what the percentage of need met is. So that kind of gives you a direction of whether or not it's likely that you'll get aid, need-based aid.
Which is another great segue to, it's just working out nicely. The way the schools are going to calculate SAI is based on the inputs that you provide in FAFSA. And as FAFSA got simplified, a lot of things that they used to consider, and very valid reasons why they would adjust the, let's say, what was the old SAI EFC, are no longer data points that they have at their fingertips. So what we're talking about in this section isn't just situations where, let's say, income has gone down, but rather a whole host of different reasons why you might want to present additional data or evidence to a school to reconsider the way that they calculate the amount of aid that you'd be eligible for. We're going to break it down into 4 buckets, and this can get a little bit dense, but we'll make sure that you have a copy of each of these 4 so that you have some sense for what are reasons that might apply to you and what are the documents that you'd want to collect along the way in order to make an appeal argument that's based on these reasons. We'll start off with changes in employment or income. So the 3 main things, an income reduction is something that often gets cited because FAFSA is by default reporting data from tax year 2022. And if anything has changed and gone down since then, you really want to make sure you have the opportunity to update the financial aid office by providing things like, let's say, recent pay stubs. If needed, a letter from an employer detailing an income change, that's much less likely to happen. If there's been a job loss in the family since 2022, absolutely let them know about that. Resigning from a job doesn't actually count as one of the reasons why financial aid officers would use professional judgment in this capacity, but other scenarios would. And so there's a list of documents here you'd want to submit under that scenario. And then one-time income is actually a really big one for this year. So this might, depending on who this applies to, when you have some sort of liquidity event, let's say you sold a bunch of stock or you sold a home or you got some bonus in 2022 that's not reflective of, let's say, your ongoing average wages over time. All the school sees is some big number and they don't know that that was a one-time thing. It's absolutely valid to let them know that the data that's reflected in 2022 is not something that's been ongoing. So in that scenario, you want to get a little bit more detailed by actually writing a letter that describes what the source of that one-time income was, um, and any documents that you might be able to share that are anonymized as much as you can, that explain how much that actually was. Inheritances count, sale of property counts. 2022 was the last peak of the stock market, and a lot of people cashed some things out back then. And so I expect this to actually be a reason that gets used a lot more frequently right now than perhaps it had been in the past. Um, I do see a question here on this. I want to make sure I answer this one. If there's a chance that negotiations would end with the school giving less merit, uh, no, I really don't think that that's the case. And I would also apply that to need-based aid.
Right.
And Aaron, yes, a recording of this will be available. Changes in family circumstance are the second really big bucket of reasons why you would actually want to appeal change in circumstance. So the biggest one that's going to apply to the larger share of people is if there's a sibling or a parent who is enrolled in college at the same time as the student. FAFSA used to have a question that asked the number of other children you had who were currently enrolled in college. And that was used by financial aid offices to reduce the amount that the parent had to pay for each child in school. That question no longer is used by default, but it's actually something that financial aid officers are allowed to take into account when deciding what your SII is going to be and how much need-based aid they'll provide. So if this applies, please do provide some proof of the sibling or parent's college enrollment, what their tuition cost of attendance is, so that they have the opportunity to take that into consideration. If the size of the family has changed, let's say you had more children, anything that has actually impacted this since you filed taxes, that's another really great reason to make sure you update the financial aid office about it. All they see is the number of dependents that are listed on your 2022 tax return. So if that number's changed, please make sure to send them, let's say, last year's tax return, for example, or this year's version that you're filing with the number of dependents that you're now claiming. If unfortunately someone, a parent or a guardian, has passed since that was filed, you should absolutely let the financial aid office know. And in many cases, they're not going to actually ask for proof for that. But in some cases, they'll still require it just because of the processes and procedures that exist for the appeal process. And if there's been a divorce or a separation, that actually changes the formula for how FAFSA translates into SAI. So you'd want to make sure that you update the financial aid office on it as well.
Chris, can I just make a comment on
Yes.
the siblings? If you have a child that's in college and you have a second one that's entering, so definitely appeal based to the new colleges that your student who's a high school senior is applying to. And I would also remind you, if there's been any change in aid from the existing college that you have a student that's already enrolled in, I would appeal there too. So just keep that in mind. This appeal process isn't just for new incoming students. You can appeal once your student is in college for all these reasons that we're talking about. Obviously, the merit isn't going to be the case because they're already there. But for all these other financial situations, you can appeal every year that they're in college.
Absolutely. And that's actually, very valuable to know. Schools are also required to keep information from your appeal for 3 years after you file it now. And so if there's something you appealed last year under any one of these circumstances and you need to do it again, or you need to collect some of that information for a different sibling, you can actually reach back out to the original school that you sent some of that information to so that you can get back the materials you already sent in case you don't have them on hand. Changes in medical and care expenses is actually one of the more common reasons why people are able to appeal for more need-based aid. There's a lot of costs that aren't captured in FAFSA that increasing share of families take on. So let's say there's a medical emergency for something that wasn't fully covered by insurance. That's a very good reason why you should, for somebody in the immediate family, it's a great reason why you should appeal for more aid. If there's some sort of, let's say, chronic or ongoing medical condition that costs a significant share, that's just expensive for the family, that likely that would not have been captured in FAFSA, and the schools will take that into consideration. In most cases, they'll only consider it the amount that isn't covered by default for insurance, but just know that it's something that they'll take into consideration. And if, let's say, whether this happened before FAFSA or is happening now, if you're taking care of an elderly or a sick family member, and you have a lot of expenses that come from that, you can absolutely let them know, provide some documentation about it, and have them understand that this is the reason why you're unable to, why the SAI or the amount they think you can afford isn't reflective of what you can actually afford. And then there's 5 somewhat unrelated reasons under the financial hardship section that I'll go through. Natural disasters that impact the finances are, this isn't going to apply to most people, but it's an extremely valid reason. It's one of the few that is explicitly called out by the Department of Education as a reason the school should look at adjusting the amount of aid that you've been provided. So whether this happened like last year or this year, let them know. If there's been any sort of bankruptcy or foreclosure, or one that is like potentially going to come up, you should let them know. If a lot of your income is going towards fixed expenses that you can't control, this is a little bit more vague, and not all schools would treat this similarly. But it's something that they can take into consideration. I can't promise that they will say yes due to these reasons, but let's say that the family already has significant student loan burdens that they're paying monthly, or other debts. A school can take that into consideration and recognize that your discretionary income, the amount you have left to pay for your children's college after everything is paid, is a lot less than what they initially calculated. This is not something they have any way to see. It's not on your taxes. So you need to, or it's not in what FAFSA gets from your taxes. So you need to let them know about it. If there's been any change or reduction in the amount of child support, let's say the parent filing for FAFSA is receiving, that's a good reason. And then this is a little bit more rare, but if a lot of, let's say for whatever reason, one of the siblings is going to a private high school or elementary school or middle school, you actually can ask the financial aid office to consider giving you more need-based aid, because that's just something else that's reflective of reduced financial capacity to pay for their college. It's less likely that it'll approve this one, but I've found specific instances where people have made this appeal and seen it work. And then the changes that don't count are if your 401k value or investment values have reduced since 2022. FAFSA asks some questions around the total value of your assets, and if that number has changed, they don't really take into consideration. If the parent, let's say, is unwilling to contribute to a student's education financially, that's not something that they're going to take into consideration. And if a parent is unable to, let's say you get your financial aid part of it might say that you should use a Parent Plus loan from the federal government to help pay for school. And if you, or that you should use some loans to help pay for school. If you don't qualify for any, they're not necessarily going to increase the amount of aid that you're provided. I'd say later in the summer or early in June, where Debbie and I are going to do a series on.
Mibu, see, I made myself.
Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
In June and a few times throughout the summer, Debbie and I are going to do a series of webinars on how the overall, basically what to consider about paying for school after you get a tuition bill that's been negotiated. But for now, just know these are some of the things they're not going to really consider. You don't really want to waste your time with making appeals arguments about this. If you should still make an appeal, but find a way to make it match some of the reasons listed above that the school is more readily primed to accept. And then this is just the last slide on reasons. I know that we've gone a little bit into the details here. If any of these apply to the student, these are what the Department of Education calls unusual circumstances. And they're all explicit reasons in regulations why a financial aid office is allowed to increase the amount of aid or change some things about the aid package for a specific student. So abandonment, neglect, incarceration, and emancipation of the minor. These are all reasons why, let's say, if there's a student on here to whom these apply, or if you know somebody to whom any of these things apply, you might let them know that they would qualify for unique scenarios of appeal for financial aid. So just there's always some solution. I'm going to pause there for a moment in case we have some questions to catch up on, and then I'd love to just spend 2 minutes introducing you to Juno and a little bit of what we do before just turning it back over for any questions you might have.
Sure. I'm scrolling back. There was a few. Oh, this is a great question about what if a school has housing deposits and there are deadlines related to that. Does it, if the family sends in a housing deposit, how will that impact the financial aid appeal or just the appeal in general?
This is a great question, and it is so unique to this year because we don't know what the aid amount is. If you have the ability to file the appeal before the housing deposits due, I would do it but in general, schools do this differently. At a lot of the schools I know pretty well, the financial aid office isn't going to really look at whether you've submitted a housing deposit or not in the process of that appeal. In some cases, if they look at that, absolutely it could reduce your negotiating. So if I can answer this succinctly, it would be you're going to file an appeal earlier, do so. Some of the things that we've spoken about right now, just FYI, the changes in circumstance, I don't think you need to wait to get the financial aid award letter back before you submit appeal documentation about the data points that a school should consider that weren't already included in the past. Everything is new this year, so take this with a grain of salt. But if any of the previous situations apply to you, I think it's okay to actually submit a financial aid appeal. You don't have to call it an appeal. You can say additional documentation and things we'd love you to consider in the process of deciding what our aid amount is. Now, you don't have to wait.
Yeah, I honestly agree with Chris because the reality is you're going to appeal regardless of what they send back because you know that you're falling into one of these buckets that Chris just talked about. The only caveat I would say to that, Chris, is that, and we didn't actually mention this and there were some questions about it, is you should go to the college website and see if they have an official process. Some colleges really do have a form. They do give you instructions about how they want their process to be handled. Others don't. So just, check that out specifically.
A great point. yeah, each school now has to have this in some portion of their financial aid website. If you can't find it, just email them and ask them where it is. I'm going to spend just 3 minutes going through this last section, and then I'll be around for as many questions as people have. I started a company called Juno now almost 6 years ago. And the objective of Juno is to help navigate the way the student loan market works. I hope that everybody gets enough aid that you don't need to use loans at all. And in June, if there's any chance that you need loans, Debbie and I will walk you through very in-depth, let's say, decision grid to understand which federal loans you and your child should use, when they make sense, when they might not make sense. With an emphasis that, candidly, for majority of people, if you need loans, the ones you should use are from the federal government. What I work on a lot of the time is creating an extra option and creating more competition in the marketplace for people who might end up using a private. And the way it works is it's actually just collective bargaining. We sign up people who, for free, who say they're going to college or their kid is going to college in the fall, what their graduation year is, and how much they think they might need to borrow, although even that is optional. And then we form this large group of people who collectively all might need to borrow a few $100 million over the course of the next year. We get a bunch of different banks and credit unions to compete on the rates that they'd offer in order to access that group. And then we make those offers available to our members on June 1st. You can think of it in some ways as like Costco, but for financial products. It's a pretty simple process, and it's really designed to be something that you're comfortable with. There's no cost to sign up. We can't take your credit information. We don't take your social security number. We don't obligate you to do anything at all. The only thing we're trying to do is just maximize the number of people who express interest in what we do so that it increases the negotiating leverage that we have with the banks and credit unions that bid on the portfolio. So this is just a free option that exists in the market. If you sign up, I can send you some information after tomorrow with how this works, recording of this webinar. Really, there's no obligation to do anything at all, and we'll just let you know what we're able to negotiate.
Chris, sorry, there's a question about what's the time frame to join Juno?
Great question. So we have really two timelines. The earlier people join, the more it helps us with the negotiating leverage that we have. So ideally, if this applies in any way to you, if you can join before April 30th, that is ideal, just because on May 1st is when we enter our final round of negotiations with a bunch of different banks. But if you ended up joining, let's say, later in the year or learning about it June or July, you can still use everything that we're able to negotiate. It's more just a favor to everybody else in the group that if you're able to join by April 30th, it just increases our ability to negotiate something better.
Okay. Chris, I do know, and I really apologize, I was typing away when you were answering the question about housing deposits. So can you repeat what you said? Because I may have something to add, but if you said it already, then I think I'll just be quiet.
Yeah, I'd say that, because I'm seeing a few questions here that are also relevant here. The website, we'll send the link tomorrow. It's just joinjuno.com, but there's a special link just for that we'll send in conjunction with Road to College that has a little bit more resources on it. So just maybe wait for that link. if you sign up before April 30th, it's ideal because we start negotiating. We finalize negotiations with banks on May 1st. So the more people who express interest, the more likely it is that they are willing to reduce their rates, trade margin for volume. You're not committing to do anything at all, except receive an email back that says what we've been able to negotiate. I saw a question on who signs up, the parent or the student. It can be either. More valuable if it's the parent, because in most cases here, for at least undergraduate students, the parent is the one driving the decision. For graduate students, which is really where we started the company, it's the student driving the decision, but it's up to you. It really does not matter. And I'll leave it there on Juno. Honestly, happy to answer any questions, but I see a bunch of questions here on financial aid appeals that I want to make sure we have a chance to get to. Will schools be sending acceptance letters separately from merit award letters? Usually they come together. Sometimes they come separately, but I say usually they come together. Is an appeal stronger or weaker if the second child is a professional student versus being an undergraduate student? Look, this is a great question. And this is where I think the art of the negotiation language being used can help you. You don't have to volunteer more information than you want to. I honestly think, fine to let somebody know that it's just you have another child who is in school. If you just volunteer that it's a professional student, it could be taken as the financial aid office assuming that this person is now paying for their own school, when in most cases they're really not able to anyway. So I just leave it at you have another student in school, let them know like what the tuition amount and cost of attendance is.
There were a few questions about, do you need to show the acceptance letter from another school or send it in with the appeal? Personally, we've never done that. It's enough to kind of say the name of the school and the amount. If the college that you're appealing to really wants validation, they will ask you for it. And I have seen once in a while a college will ask to see it, but majority of times they don't. Because honestly, if you name the college and you name the amount, they're probably kind of aware that that is a valid amount that school is offering. It's, we say this for a long time. We say this from the beginning of the process, and at this time of the process, college is a business, and colleges, to some extent know who their competitors are, and they know what their competitors are offering. So, if it's a valid offer, they can probably sense it.
I see a great question here that I'd also love your perspective on. And so this is, does the financial aid package letter include the additional merit scholarship money not previously offered? Someone heard that's a good reason not to submit an appeal until the financial aid award letter is provided. Look, in theory, if you got a $10,000 Coca-Cola scholarship, the financial aid office is supposed to subtract that from the aid amount that you're eligible for. You are technically supposed to report it in most cases. Many schools do not proactively ask you to. So it's your choice whether to do so or not.
It also depends on how the money is going to be dispersed from that private scholarship.
Right.
Because some private scholarship money does go directly to the college versus some goes to the student.
Exactly. Yeah. So for some of them, they'll know. For others, they won't necessarily. But also in reality, like, a lot of the financial aid offices they're trying to help you as much as possible. Everybody knows that this is a really expensive process. Let's see.
So this question about enrollment versus housing deposits, I personally, if there is a housing deposit deadline and there is not an enrollment deadline, which colleges are doing because quite honestly, it's a little bit of a money grab, right? That they are kind of putting the FOMO in, that your student might miss out on housing, and they might, so you got to decide how much you're willing to risk it. I think putting a housing deposit down is not gonna, as long as there is not a accompanying enrollment deposit, it's not really gonna impact your negotiation because the student hasn't agreed to go, you haven't put down a deposit, you have to risk that you might not get that money back. I absolutely wouldn't put an enrollment deposit down because that is basically, saying that you're coming, your student's coming, and you will like lose leverage in negotiating.
Yeah. Another great question on, do you appeal need-based aid every year? Someone is asking if the price carries over for all 4 years. If there's been a change in the financial circumstance since the initial need-based aid allocation that you got, and specifically one where you are facing higher costs than what they considered at that time, or the family income or situation is different than it was back then, meaning you need more aid, you should ask for it. There's just no way that they're going to know or even have the opportunity to consider that you could qualify for more need-based aid after you get the initial version, unless you're asking for it.
Okay.
Interesting question here. If school A costs, let's say, $60,000 and gives you $20,000 in merit scholarship, school B costs a little bit more, so 65 grand and gives you 25K in merit, is school A going to reject the comparison because school B costs more? Completely case by case, but you don't have to say that the other school that you want to attend is like, there's 3 ways that you can do this. You can either say another school is offering me more money, is there anything you can do? Not volunteering anything. You can say another school is offering me $25,000 instead without naming the school, and so it could only work in your favor. Or you can say what the school is and they're offering you more, and then maybe the financial aid office is going to spend the time to go look at exactly what the total cost to attend the other program is, but probably not in that process. So really just think about it in terms of what's going to make the most effective argument if you're on the other side reading that letter to let you get more money.
One other thing I'll mention is if you appeal and you don't get any more money, you can think about this. I wouldn't write them off completely, because what happens sometimes is, and Chris mentioned this earlier, financial aid offices have budgets, admissions offices, they have budgets, for how much they can use for merit. And the closer it gets to the actual enrollment deadline, which is shifting this year, money might become more available because another student declined, and so they're not taking the money that the college offered. So you might want to make it known, even at the time where they say maybe they're not going to increase the merit, again, that this is your student's number one choice, and if money becomes available, could they consider your student then? So the thing is, you do not have to, your student does not have to enroll. You don't have to feel the pressure to enroll until the enrollment deadline. So sometimes, and I've absolutely seen this, where families hold out to the very, very end before actually telling a college that they are enrolling, and towards the end, they proactively, sometimes the colleges reach out and say, okay, now we have money, we can give you a little bit more. So it's all, kind of like your risk tolerance. I mean, there's no risk, but it's like, sometimes families and students just want to get the process over, and I can understand that. And other people are kind of willing to wait it out to the very end.
Fantastic points. I do see continuing questions about housing deposits. Some schools have refundable and some schools have non-refundable. And a lot are refundable. Apologies. So look, if you don't worry too much about the housing deposit. I know that it's a lot of stress, both for you and for the student, to understand if they're going to have a place to live, or they're going to, let's say, like, get good housing in the lottery. That matters to people. Don't worry too much about that decision relative to appealing for the financial aid decision. Almost, like, to a great degree, try to think of them as separate decisions. Interesting question here on, for a job loss, would a company-wide voluntary severance program be considered resigned? I wish I had a better answer on that. I don't know. It's up to the financial aid officer, and really how you present it to them. If it were me, I might present it as, like, they're in many cases, a company that's offering a voluntary severance might have been heading towards a large layoff anyway. And so really, depending on how you present it and the information that you're offering, I think it will compel them to view it as a job loss instead of a resignation. Business net worth is considered for financial aid purposes. But it's a little bit murky in that business valuation can depend extremely heavily on who is valuing it. I won't go into too much detail there, but I'd be happy to talk about that offline.
But I guess the issue with that is that was a change in the FAFSA calculation.
Yeah.
So if you had a small business under 100 employees, it was not part of the calculation. So I think it's valid to bring that up from an appeal standpoint. I obviously think it's a horrible thing that they've done, that they've added that to the calculation. So I'm not saying, I have no idea how the college will react, but I say bring it up, because it's really penalizing small businesses.
Absolutely is. Yeah, I guess so that the context is, just as Debbie mentioned, I mean, still, I think a majority of Americans work for small businesses, and a lot of people here probably have one. Wasn't previously considered under 100 employees, now is. But how you actually value that is very made up in most circumstances. And so it's incumbent upon you to present what is realistic and fair. And in that scenario, I would, let's say, if the business has faced significant changes to its costs, whether that is cost of goods sold or employment, or other headwinds from inflation. And these are all great things that you could bring up for why perhaps the value that you might have initially calculated is not reflective of what it would look like today, and you need more help.
I just want to share, somebody shared how they appealed, and I think I hadn't really thought about this circumstance, and it's a valid one, depending on if it applies to you. So I think it's a good one to just read. They said that they successfully appealed financial aid by telling the college they happen to live in a no income state, but they work in, I assume, the adjoining state, or maybe not, but they work in a state that is where they have to pay state taxes. So they kind of brought that up as an issue, which maybe wasn't truly reflective in their FAFSA. So good for you. That was a good one.
Very good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, in general, just the principle is they only know what they see in front of them. They
Right.
want to help you change the numbers to reflect reality that isn't captured in what they see. So there's probably 1,000 other reasons why you might be able to present something that they should consider. Spend a little bit of time thinking about it.
So there's been a few questions also about, if you're sharing merit from another college, does it have to be of the same similar selectivity? No, it doesn't. You know, if it is, it's probably a stronger case, but I would still share any offer that makes a college more competitive than the college that you're appealing to.
And again, you don't have to volunteer that the higher amount from another college is from a significantly less competitive place. If they ask for it, you should tell them, but you really don't have to volunteer that.
Somebody else is asking, are the appeals going to be reviewed before a student has to accept offers, basically before the enrollment deadline? Yeah, they're going to try their hardest to do that. And again, to Chris's point, the earlier you can get it in, the more likely they're going to get it back to you. And they'll have, the closer you do it, they might get more rushed. And they're going to also may have fewer. It can go either way. They may have fewer funds, or they may have a little bit more. But I personally think the earlier the better.
Agreed. And a lot of schools are already shifting the timeline by which you have to decide if you're going to attend. Some haven't announced it yet. It's going to partly depend on whether they actually get the FAFSA information from the Department of Education next week. Candidly, if that gets delayed any further, some that haven't announced that they're going to move their decision date will have to.
Yeah, I have seen comments from colleges that they, as Chris said, obviously it all depends on when they exactly get the data from the government, but they're now looking at, early April, second week of April of when they think that their offers are going to be able to go out. Oh, yes.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Somebody's asking if I have a full merit scholarship from one school and I'm hoping to get merit money from another school that your student was admitted from. Can you email the second school to encourage them to consider you for merit? Yes. My gosh, if you've got a full merit scholarship from one school, use it, against another school if that other school is where your student really wants to go.
Absolutely. And look, in those scenarios for merit appeals, when you actually really do want to go to that place, it is helpful to go into a little bit more detail about specific things about that school that you think will change your life, make you excel, and things that you contribute to, whether it's a specific program, a team, a club, professor, or something. If you add a little bit more true raw emotion into the rationale for why you think you're going to contribute more to this campus by being there, and it's going to contribute a lot to you, the person on the other side of receiving that letter is going to be significantly more likely to make a change in what you're going to get.
Yeah.
I've seen this
Go ahead.
question a few times in just different flavors really quickly about public schools that may or may not give a lot of merit aid. Is it still worth asking? I'd say absolutely yes. Some schools just have smaller budgets when it comes to merit aid than others do. But the amount that they're able to give, as Debbie was mentioning earlier, is also dependent on the number of people who accept their offers of admission from that school that came with merit aid. And so these dollars do shift between now all the way through the time that you enroll. So ask now. If you get a no, as Debbie said, you should still ask again at some point during the summer.
So there's been a few questions about appealing to public universities. My recommendation is to appeal, but again, no harm. But the chance, again, they just have slightly, or not slightly, they just have less funds. So I have seen fewer increases of merit appeals at public universities. But again, there's no harm in trying. One other thing I wanted to mention is the case where and you might not know this, until you get your offer. If you didn't get any, you don't have to have gotten needs-based aid to appeal for more needs-based aid. So, and it kind of, again, goes to all the situations and circumstances that Chris outlined, because you may come back and the college says you don't qualify for need-based aid, but something has changed and they don't know that, which would cause you to qualify for need-based aid. So just because they said, we're not giving you need-based aid, but your situation has changed, then you can appeal for need-based aid. You don't have to have an offer of need-based aid to appeal it. I mean, you could have gotten nothing and still appealed, because that your situation has changed and it might cause you to now be eligible for need-based aid.
A good question I wanted to just hit on here about when you appeal, should you do it in writing versus just calling the financial aid office? Look, I would do both. The appeal requirements from the new FAFSA Act to make it, there has to be this written process. So you will still have to submit some documentation and this more formal letter. But I don't think it's going to hurt if you also contact the financial aid office directly, explain your situation, and ask them if there's anything that you can do.
So somebody's asking, is the CSS profile appeal process similar to the FAFSAs? The CSS profile doesn't have a different appeal procedure than the FAFSA. It's just that was an additional form that a college asked of you. So, you should appeal, and the process is going to be the same, whether the school asks for a CSS profile or whether it's just asking for FAFSA.
Exactly, right. Can you ask public universities to grant in-state tuition to out-of-state through the appeal process? It's an interesting one. So for the first year of school, I think in almost all cases, no. But I've seen people successfully apply for in-state after the student has been at the school for a year so that they get in-state for the following years. Not all programs do it this way, but it's definitely worth looking into because it's one of the biggest ways to save money when you're going out of state to a public school.
But I will say, and I don't honestly, I don't know if the school has to have a formal program or not. There are some state universities that do give in-state tuition to students that are in another state. It can't hurt to put it in there, as an option for the college to consider when you're appealing. So there's a general question that came up a lot. I think Chris and I both answered it in the chat, but we didn't actually say it to everybody. There was a question about if you're appealing merit, who do you appeal to? If you're appealing financial aid, who do you appeal to? Meaning, do you appeal to one? And basically the answer is if it's merit, you're going back to the admissions office. If it's financial aid, it's going to the financial aid office.
Fantastic question. Apologies for not clarifying that earlier. But yeah, sometimes the admissions office will loop in the financial aid office in that discussion. But the admissions office is trying to maximize the number of people who enroll, who they've admitted, something that heavily impacts their rankings. So they're the one who really has the incentive to respond to you and try to get you to actually enroll. And they're the one who will probably help you a little bit there.
So here's another good question. I'm going to be honest, I'm not quite sure I know the answer, but I think let's share it. Somebody's asking, I'm assuming that their student wants to defer for a gap year, and they're asking how to ask the college to also defer the merit along with them. I mean, I would just be outright and ask. I don't know, honestly, what their response will be, because again, thinking about colleges in terms of a business, every year they have a different budget. They may or may not guarantee that the following year your student can get merit. It might be something, I mean, obviously to ask. So I don't know what the outcome of that would be. But definitely it's a conversation you'd have to have with the college.
And just two more here I want to make sure we have a chance to hit on. So the
5
question,
minutes or less.
can we appeal to before we receive the FAFSA decision? And the answer is yes. You can appeal merit now, and if there's things about your circumstance that have changed or additional info that you want to provide, you can absolutely at least ask the school if there's a process through which you can send them that information for them to consider. A lot of schools won't let you initiate an appeal until after they have calculated what your aid amount is going to be, but it won't hurt to at the very least just send a quick email asking if you have the opportunity now to send the additional information. And see a question here about, so some schools' websites do say that they do not consider appeals. A lot of those just haven't been updated to comply with what the new regulations are. And so it might say that. They probably don't even know that it says that, but they will have to accept appeals now.
Okay, well, I think we got through a lot and answered a lot of questions. Thank you, Chris. Hopefully this empowers everybody out there. I feel, like, go ahead and appeal. This is your chance, make your case. Definitely, as Chris has outlined, if you know you're falling into one of those financial situations already, that something has changed between your 2022 taxes and today, or there is information that is an addition that the college needs to know about and it wasn't reflected on the FAFSA, you're going to appeal. So get it ready, or even send in that appeal now, because regardless of what what they offer you, you're going to appeal. And, on the merit side, I think there's absolutely no harm in appealing. They're not going to take away anything that they've already given. And it's you and your child's chance to make a stronger case about why they deserve more money and why that school is so important to them. So give it a try.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Thanks again, Debbie, for giving me the opportunity to be here. And I wish everybody the best of luck.
Good luck. Take care.